Isaac Newton didn't become untouchable because his ideas were better. He became untouchable because he positioned himself inside the only institution that could decide whose ideas mattered. And once he did that, challenging him wasn't about being wrong. It was about survival. Not just intellectually, but professionally. This is the story of how scientific authority actually works. Not through peer review or open debate, but through alignment with power. Newton figured out something most scientists never do. The best idea doesn't win on merit alone. The best positioned idea wins. And the mechanism he used wasn't a theorem or a discovery. It was 2 government appointments that gave him control over money, reputation, and professional access. This wasn't a conspiracy. It was something quieter. An alignment of incentives that made dissent professionally expensive. By the end, you'll see why opposition didn't just lose arguments. It lost leverage. Let's start with what everyone knows. Newton publishes the Principia in 1687. It's revolutionary. Gravity, motion, mathematics, the foundation of physics. You'd think this makes him untouchable. It doesn't. It makes him contested. The Principia is dense, difficult, and threatens existing frameworks. Most scholars can't even understand it. Others openly dismiss it. Expectation? Groundbreaking work gets immediate acceptance. Reality? It gets skepticism, rivalry, and institutional resistance. Because here's the thing. Being right isn't enough. You also have to control the infrastructure that decides what right looks like. And Newton was about to do exactly that. In 1696, Newton accepts a position that has nothing to do with science. He becomes Warden of the Royal Mint. 3 years later, he's promoted to Master of the Mint. This isn't ceremonial. It's one of the most powerful government positions in England. He's overseeing currency, prosecuting counterfeiters, managing monetary policy. Why would the greatest scientist of his generation take a job in finance? Because it wasn't about the salary. It was about proximity to state power. This meant Newton could summon people, interrogate them under oath, and prosecute them legally. He had treasury access, parliamentary influence, enforcement authority. He wasn't just a scientist anymore. He was a government official with enforcement power. And here's where the story could have split. Newton could have kept these roles separate, science in one hand, state power in the other. He didn't. Because in 1703, he made a second move. Newton becomes president of the Royal Society, the most prestigious scientific institution in Europe. Now he controls what gets published, who gets funding, who gets credibility, who gets academic positions. From this point on, criticizing Newton didn't just mean disagreement. It meant writing papers that wouldn't be published, careers that wouldn't advance, and reputations that quietly stalled. By the early 1700s, Newton didn't need to defend his ideas anymore. The system defended them for him. Something fundamental had shifted. The rules hadn't changed, but the game had. Let's look at what happened to the people who tried to push back. Robert Hooke, a brilliant physicist with his own theories about gravity. He accuses Newton of borrowing ideas without credit. He demands recognition. Newton responds by letting Hooke fade. When Newton publishes the Optics after Hooke's death, Hooke's contributions quietly disappear from the narrative. His portrait is never recovered. His work gets minimized in institutional memory. Hooke didn't lose the argument because he was wrong. He lost because Newton controlled the record. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, the co-inventor of calculus. Newton accuses him of plagiarism. Leibniz defends himself publicly. But here's the twist. Newton doesn't just argue back. He convenes an official Royal Society investigation into Leibniz. The committee is stacked with Newton's allies. The report is written under Newton's influence. The conclusion? Leibniz stole the idea. Even today, historians debate who independently arrived first. But what isn't debated is who controlled the verdict. This wasn't a trial. It was a lesson. Newton wasn't proving Leibniz wrong. He was proving that institutional backing decides outcomes, not evidence alone. And Leibniz spent the rest of his life trying to restore his reputation. He never fully did. Here's the counterintuitive part. Newton didn't corrupt the system, he used the system exactly as it was designed. The Royal Society wasn't built for open debate. It was built to establish consensus and enforce credibility. The Mint wasn't a side job, it was a signal. Newton had state backing. These institutions weren't neutral arbiters, they were credibility engines, and Newton understood that. We think of science as a marketplace of ideas where the best argument wins. But institutions don't reward endless debate, they reward resolution. And resolution requires authority. Newton didn't just have better ideas, he had better positioning. He aligned intellectual dominance with institutional control, and that made opposition not just difficult, but structurally disadvantaged. You could still argue, you just couldn't win the same way. And this pattern didn't die with Newton. Think about a whistleblower in a large organization. They can be correct and still lose everything. Not because they're wrong, but because the system decides when truth is allowed to matter. Their evidence gets buried. Their credibility gets questioned. Their career quietly ends. This is the same structure Newton used. Industry-funded research that shapes regulation. Platform owners who control what gets amplified, not just what gets said. Academic citation cartels that decide whose work gets recognized. AI safety committees that determine which risks are taken seriously. Medical guideline boards that cement consensus before alternative evidence can surface. When knowledge aligns with power, the question stops being, "Is this true?" and becomes, "Who has the authority to decide?" Newton didn't become untouchable because he was the smartest. He became untouchable because he was smart and positioned inside the system that grants authority. And once you're inside that system, you don't need to win every argument. You just need to control who gets to make one. The lesson isn't that Newton was corrupt. It's that institutions reward alignment over disruption. And the people who understand that don't just shape ideas. They shape what's allowed to be questioned. Newton didn't just discover gravity. He discovered how to make his version of gravity unavoidable.